been battling some health issues. So, oh, look at this. People are rolling in.
How many people we have? Oh, 12.
Maybe we'll give them just a couple more minutes, Christine, and
maybe one, because
okay, sounds good.
Originally, I'm Canadian, and being late is terribly rude. And
It-
second of all, I want to be respectful for the people that arrived on time, so we can give them one more, and then they can join us when we get started.
That sounds like a plan. Okay, I'm looking. There it is. It just went from 7:04 to 7:05. So let's start. So tonight we're going to hear from Christine Gamble Gabor, who, as she just said, is Canadian, which means she's very nice, right? And says sorry a lot. I have a grandson up there. But basically, and as Cheryl said earlier, hasn't heard the word civics in a while. It's a real shame. I mean, we've become ignorant about so many things, and our rights and responsibilities as citizens is right at the top of the list. When I sent out the reminder or the original notice of the meeting, I was looking for the quote, Thomas Jefferson's quote that an educated citizenry is a vital part of our democracy. And he actually didn't say that. He said something even more powerful and even more prescient. He said, in every government on earth is some trace of human weakness, some germ of corruption and degeneracy, which cunning will discover and wickedness insensibly open, cultivate, and improve. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves, therefore, are its only safe depositories. And to render even them safe, their minds must be improved to a certain degree. So with that, let Christine, well, I should say Christine is the chair of the Civics Education Committee of the League of Women Voters of Palm Beach County. So this is right up her alley.
It actually is my alley. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to see you. I want you to know, with such a small group, let's be as interactive as you want to be. I like seeing the faces, so keep yourselves there if you can. It makes it a little more personal than Zooms. So do that. Tonight, I'm going to give you a presentation on civics education and some of the things that are happening with education and civics education, both within our state and with others. Please, if you have any questions, you can put them in chat. But if you put your hand up as well, because it's a smaller group, we can certainly be comfortable sharing. I'm going to share a presentation with you and get started. All right. Civics education. Education is important. What we're going to be talking about is the importance of civics education, and not only its importance, but how it can help us, each one of us, empower voters and defend our democracy. In my personal opinion, it is one of the most important ways that we can make people realize the value of their vote. Did you know that according to the 2016 survey by Annenberg Public Policy Center, only 1 in 4 of those surveyed were able to name the 3 branches of our federal government? 1 in 3 are the only ones that could name the 3 branches of the government. It's quite shocking. Why would you vote if you didn't even know that really one basic question? Civics is the study of privileges and obligations of its citizens. And it certainly has become a hot topic since the last election. If you watch today's news, as I did, it is full of discussions. Story 1, 2, and 3 were about voter suppression. Without civics education, again, in my opinion, voters often seem to vote against their interests. For example, immigrants who support anti-immigrant candidates. It makes no sense at all. As an immigrant from another country, when I first came here, I can tell you I was shocked, and I can also say appalled by the lack of knowledge by its citizens. That's why I started the Civics Education Committee 4 years ago. We need to prioritize civics education if we want to help voters do their homework. I believe, Michael, from what you've just told me, that there's an increasing concern about the declining level of civic awareness and engagement across the country, really, and an abysmal lack of knowledge. In addition, as we'll find out as we go along further, there are new laws that are being put in place in Florida and other states that are going to have very, very, very long-term consequences. Let me tell you a little bit about the League of Women Voters. You know we're nonpartisan, we are political. We were established in 1920, which means we're just a little over 100 years old. 20% of our membership in Palm Beach County are men. What's our mission? To empower voters and defend democracy. What's our vision? Our vision, and I hope it is that the same vision of the Democratic Party, a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, and the knowledge and the confidence to participate in their democracy. What do? Educate and advocate. What we're going to cover today, the importance of civics education. And as you probably have already heard, I'm able to sing that song really, really well because I'm passionate about it. Civics education with our committee, we added civility and critical thinking, and I'll tell you why. Florida initiatives, recent legislation, educational tools, working with schools and others, and what we, all of us, can do to brook change. I hope you all agree that civics education is more than just showing up to vote. I hope you realize that voters need to be open to learning about all sides of an issue so that they are an educated voter and that they can learn how to show respect for those with whom they disagree. We don't see that in the news much. And it's really difficult because what it does is splits people and it splits those votes. People should be educated and they should be voting according to what their beliefs are, not any other reason. We need civics upholds and understands the democratic values. I have a dear friend who tells me all of the time what this button says, that your words have great power. We need to use them to encourage and inspire. And in our case, we need to use them to tell people to get out and vote. It's really important in 2022. So.
Christine, if I could just interrupt for a second and show people my shirt.
All right, you could be on my team.
I just, and it works in two ways. One as a philosophical statement, which is what you're saying. You know, we all win when we vote, however the vote comes out. As a political statement for our club, I think it's correct that if we vote, you know, if the people that didn't vote in 2016, enough of them came out to vote in 2020 that we had a different result. And the more people that we can get to vote, the more likely we're going to, I know you're nonpartisan, but we're going to be electing more Democrats just because the policies are more favorable to your average person.
Great shirt. Take a guess. Tell me, Charlie, what's your guess? about the percentage of US eligible voters that voted in the 2020 presidential election? You can't be wrong because it's a guess.
You're asking me?
I am, Charlie.
Oh, I would say on the average, one third of eligible voters vote.
So we had a really, really big turnout in 2020 because it was presidential and there were a
That
lot
was
of
different.
feelings.
That was
And so
different.
we had approximately 66.2% nationwide and about 77% in Florida. Those
Wow.
are really big numbers.
That was an exception. That was an
That was-
exception.
Absolutely. That's why I put this slide in there. That's nearly 2/3 of the estimated eligible voters. However, what I want you to put in your thoughts and to think about, that an increase of just 1% in voters is 2.3 million votes. So if you have an increase of just 1% of the people that you get out to vote, that is 2.3 million votes. That's really important. However, strange as those numbers are, how did the United States rank in its 2020 voter turnout compared to the voter turnout in 35 other developed nations? It was 24 out of 35 developed nations. That
Wow.
is not so good.
Nope.
When you look at our local elections,
Water.
I have to tell you, you are going to be shocked by some of these numbers. So this is Wendy Satori-Link's presentation. And what she is telling us is the difference between the turnout and presidential is really quite shocking. Really, it's quite shocking,
Wow.
especially when people realize the impact of municipal actions on their everyday life. We need to let them know that. March 19th was the election day for 19 municipalities across Palm Beach County. It was a record-breaking turnout, record-breaking of 18.89%.
Yeah.
Record-breaking at 18.89%. Yikes. 45% of the mail ballots were returned were voters who had never voted in their city's municipal election. Why are they trying to take away vote by mail? I just gave you that number.
Exactly.
Because it works.
Well,
Yeah.
and it works and it's fair and equitable. It not only works, it's fair and equitable if you vote by mail.
Yeah.
2022 will be an important year to educate voters and get them to the polls. I have a point of interest because so many of you are from Delray Beach. Only 30% of total registered voters cast their vote. That's 15,109 voted out of 50,900 registered voters in Delray Beach.
I think it's even lower.
Those are the numbers.
Yeah, sad, very unfortunate.
What is civility? We have included civility in our mission and in this presentation because of the impact that it has on voters and on critical thinking. Communications with others, whether you're pro or con, is too often tainted by rudeness, nastiness, the simple inability to listen. If we are going to get people to go to vote, one of the things that I'm pressing is civility, because I think it's really important to respect other points of view. And when you're discussing, stick to the facts, not to those feelings. You don't have to agree. However, we can all actually learn something new as we go along.
Call you back, I'm on a Zoom meeting.
It's important not to go into conversation with the goal of converting somebody, because you know that's not going to happen. Facts do matter. Critical thinking, again, we added this because I find that's one of the biggest issues with the voters, is they say, I am a whatever they are. Don't you want to vote for your own interests? Don't you want to vote for what you believe in? If it's women's rights, if it's equal pay, if whatever it is, critical thinking provides you with the skills to do that. They include observing, analyzing, discriminating, applying standards, seeking evidence. We see a lot of that's not happening right now. And voters need to use critical thinking to choose the candidate who supports their beliefs in the issues that are important to them. Later in the presentation, I'll give you examples of developing and using this. It is something when you're reaching out to other people that is important. Civics and voting, oh my goodness, do we have news. There's significant new state voting restrictions, for example, in 389 bills in 48 states as of May 14th, proposing voting restrictions. Many of them target vote by mail, many of them. Arizona, the new rules mean voters who do not cast a ballot at least once every 2 years will have to respond to a government notice or they're removed.
Wow.
Florida, we're going to go into more detail on the next slide. These are just examples of some of the states so that you have an idea of what we're up against to get out the vote. Georgia, as we all probably know, removed 100,000 names from the voters' rolls, and they're introduced a number of new bills to limit the use of mail ballot drop boxes. They're prohibiting food and water at the polls, etc. Iowa was the first state to approve an omnibus voting restriction law that shortens the application period for mail-in ballots. It bars election officials from proactively sending application forms to voters. And auditors can actually face criminal charges if they don't follow procedures in purging voter rolls. How different is that? Michigan is limiting the number of ballot drop boxes. They cannot send mail-in ballots proactively. They've really changed the photo ID requirements. New Hampshire has, they eased the removal of voters from their rolls, and they need additional identification, which we know which communities have issues with. And Texas, we'll talk Texas on its own. One of the most restrictive voting bills in the country was defeated. And if you watch the news today, you know that it's back in the news because they want to get it back up and running.
Well, Christine, one thing I just saw the other day about Texas, and it was from last year, when you mentioned the ballot boxes, their law allows only one ballot box per county. So Loving, Texas, which has about 169 people and no Black people, it's majority white. I think there's a couple of Native Americans. They get one ballot box. And Harris County, where Houston sits, has 4.5 million people, and they get one ballot box. Very nice.
It's a good point, and it certainly is interesting. Florida civics and voting initiatives. I know that you're all aware that there have been many. I'm going to do a quick overview of them. Bill H7011. Changes include requiring voters to renew their mail voting application every 2 years. They have to submit a form of identification. With some exceptions, voters' access to drop boxes will be limited to early voting hours. Voters will be permitted to drop off only 2 ballots for non-family members. We know what a big issue that is. That's likely to bar efforts to provide food and water because they're talking about it. And donations to election budgets from private individuals are not allowed. It's revised requirements for student literacy skills. I have a whole bunch of other things. We'll continue with this. The Civics Literacy Excellent Initiative, $106 million, using the state portion of the elementary and secondary school relief fund through the coronavirus. So they're taking the funds from something else to do this as well. He's calling for bonuses for Florida teachers who complete civics education training. The training is very interesting. We'll discuss that later because it, in my opinion, might not be fair and equitable. S11108 passed in June 23rd. Critics say this initiative will inject a highly partisan and highly biased content into the curriculum with an inappropriate dose of religious values. I personally, as someone that finds religion and state shouldn't be combined, find this very worrisome. The Education Commissioner, Richard Corcoran, recently said that the goal for this bill is to keep all that crazy liberal stuff out of classrooms. If it passes, It would ban teaching the critical race theory, which is currently a hot button political issue, as we all know right now. The bottom line is that we need to teach students how to think, not what to think. These bills change that worry in such a worrisome way. And so if you look at more of the information, the HR one for the People Act, the John Lewis Act, etc., we can discuss that a little later, but certainly know that there are lots of questions that we have. Legislative changes in Florida, expanded vouchers, that's hard for the public schools. It's a biggie. So he's made it easier for parents to send their kids to private school on the public dime. They've gone even further with the expanded vouchers. Common Core is out. No more critical race theory, which is a very big issue. That might be a presentation on its own, so we won't go into great detail with that. The teacher's pay is up, which is a good thing, and with that bonus as well. The moment of silence in school, again, that is an issue, in my opinion. Putting that, it's going to be mandated so that they have no option. Public school teachers, with all of the things that they're doing to have private and charter schools, this mandate is for public schools. Keep that in your head. Teachers will not be allowed to make suggestions on how kids should use the time. I think that's going to be very interesting. Opponents have long argued that mandating a moment of silence in public schools blurs the line between church and state. And I must tell you that somebody coming from another country originally, I would agree with that. Public universities and colleges must survey their students, faculty, and staff and their beliefs and viewpoints to support intellectual diversity. What can I tell you about that? It's really, really, really something that is going to change the face of our education. Additionally, American history and civics materials will be embedded into all grade levels. And the critical race theory is a perspective some teachers simply employ to explain how race and race have impacted life throughout history. Again, it's something that is a really negative, in my opinion. Our divide is widening. That's our bottom line. So overall, if you look at it, some states are expanding access and others are restricting. Approximately 12 states have expanded voter access. 8 have restricted it. Some did a little bit of both. So theoretically, we should have about 25% of eligible voters living in states that improve their laws. With the Supreme Court ruling just the other day, we know that that's going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue bringing the HR 1, We the People Act through as well. It really does have an impact on all of us. I want to go through to tell you what we've been doing, how we think we can go work together, and coming back positive. What has our civics education team been doing? Oh my goodness, do you think we keep busy? The answer is of course we do, because I believe that every single person in this country who is able to vote should vote. We're creating educational tools. We're working with local issue groups in other leagues. We work with other organizations. We do a lot of work with the schools. We're registering voters. We research bills, initiatives, and more. And one of the biggest issues is that we're addressing equity and diversity. They're central to our current and future success in engaging all individuals, all households, all communities, and all policymakers. We are not simply a country that is for one type of person only. Here's an idea of our learning tools. We have many crossword puzzle booklets. We'll be happy to share those with you. We have a number of PowerPoint presentations, and we have critical thinking worksheets. Here's our minis. So when you look at our minis, I'm going to tell you a story of how the mini crossword puzzles began. So When my husband and I were getting ready for the citizenship exam, I have a really good memory, so don't tell me any secrets. I learned the 100 questions in order. And he said to me, no, you can't do that. Every night I'm going to ask you them randomly because it's a random question. I said, I don't want to do that. He said, we'll invite our neighbors over, which of course we're all Americans. We'll have a wine and wine. You can have a glass of wine and you can whine about having to do them this way. So over that period of time, we had 72 people to our house. They answered 10 questions. They had to get 6 right. How many of those 72 people would have passed the citizenship test? Guess.
20.
3. And so when I started civics education, I said, we need to get the education out there, not only for new immigrants, but for citizens in a fun way where they can learn and have fun. Series 2 is about Palm Beach County. It's stressing the importance about participating in local elections. It is something that is at the SOE and that is really important. Series 3, we worked with the schools and the school board. It's the grade 7 textbook, Gateway to American Government, The Bridge to Success. They are using them like you wouldn't believe. It gives them a fun learning tool that helps them to know their stuff. And series 4, when we were doing the grade 7 textbook, I have interns, and one of the interns, who was a very young, strong feminist, said, there's not one woman in that textbook and I'm really upset and they're not saying them. I said, we'll do one on women. So we did a 100th anniversary celebration of over 350 women who have made a big difference in the United States of every background. We were very, very careful. Oops. Critical thinking worksheets. Critical thinking worksheets are something that we're finding very important at our presentations. We take the issues that are important for today. So we have 13 different ones: civics education, climate change, the government, guns, you can see them all, etc. The first size of the page gives questions that you answer on your own. The second side of the page, you work as a team and hopefully with somebody with opposite views, and you look at the issue and you try to think about it critically. It really is a fun learning experience. Here's an example. So the guns critical thinking worksheet gives you an overview. In this case, because every one of them is a different format, you put in your fact or opinion. This isn't the complete map because there's not enough space, but it tells you with 3 or 4 others that you discuss, and you respect the opinion. And that discussion, this exercise takes us about 8 to 10 minutes. It's welcomed by people of all ages. I'm happy to share the sheets with you. And if there's anything that you think we're missing in areas of issues, we're happy to create new ones as well. PowerPoint presentations, we have created 5, your voice, your power, your vote. We are requested to give this very often in communities. For example, the Muslim community, communities where they say we want a straightforward presentation. We don't want it to be because our people aren't voting. Civic stability and critical thinking, balance of powers, the importance of the US courts, because as you know, what's happened with stacking the courts has changed our democracy. That one is extremely interactive, where we put people in different groups and you get to try a case and then you see what actually happened. Civics trivia is just fun. It's a fun exercise to find out how much you know. Our work with schools. Oops, pardon me. Back.
May I interrupt for a moment? This is Julie Cassell. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Because you were talking about, the judicial system, but I guess we all know, I think, well, we probably all know that voter turnout has dramatically reduced over time as a result of the fact that we don't teach civics, and that's concerning, and definitely something we should address. But also there are so many other aspects of it that you're discussing, which is just how it generally creates an unfair system. And we see this evident in the jury selection process where people are pitifully ignorant of their own rights or the rights that they should have in the judicial system. So you're even talking about people who have less resources, don't know their rights if they're arrested, they don't have the ability to defend themselves. So it's more than just voting, right? I mean, it's more than just can we get people out to vote? Do they understand the systems of government? But it's also taking away their understanding of what their own rights are within the system. And that is also really scary and perhaps a great motivating factor in terms of how we can reach people, in an education.
And we really are trying to work with the schools, Julie, so thank you for that. Because again, when I started the Civics Education Committee, it was exactly for that reason. We need to know, we need to use critical thinking to vote for what we personally believe in. This is democracy. We need to do that. So we're doing a lot of work with schools. We have something called a government bee, which is like a spelling bee, but with government questions. I have to tell you, if anybody ever volunteers for it, you couldn't possibly have more fun than working with these kids. National History Day, we judge all of the civics presentations. Again, you couldn't have more fun than that. National Voter Registration Day. All public school students have an opportunity to register. We had the 5th largest drive in 2019. It's quite amazing. If you look over to the bottom right, you'll see a picture of us with our interns. So we have interns, and these interns, some of them go forward and start their own business when they go to college. It's really quite amazing. The We the People, we also do, which is working with the Law Association, again, on civics education. There's a lot of other organizations working on civics. We work with a large number of them. You can get a lot of learning tools. You can get a lot of information. For example, iCivics, it's nonprofit. It provides educational online games, lesson plans. It promotes civics education, encourage students to become active citizens. The schools in Florida use that, or at least our schools in Florida use that. The Lou Frey Institute, they have excellent learning tools. Lynn University's Project Civitas is really, it encourages common courtesy, mutual understanding, responsibility of citizenship. We work close with people from that school as well. They have a number of town hall events with community leaders. You should try to get involved in that if you're trying to reach out. What you need to do is get out there. The National Institute of Civil Discourse is nonpartisan, based in the University of Arizona. They address incivility, political dysfunction. Of course, you've all heard of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Their teaching resources really are quite interesting. So that it's something that you as an organization can share with your members. Because your members are probably not voting at a higher percentage than other people across the country, and we need to reach everyone. Civics Education 2021. I believe the time is now for you, for me, for everyone. Finally, after 4 years of this committee, everyone is talking about it. I had 20 calls today from different parts of the United States saying, Christine, share your tools with me. Christine, I want your minis. Legislators are talking about it. Not always in a way we want them to, but they're still talking about it. And fortunately and unfortunately, laws are being made. Our voice needs to be heard. What can we, you, myself, your family, your friends do? Promote civics education. Have those presentations available. You need to educate and inspire your members and voters. We need you to support and encourage diversity. Whose vote are they trying to take away? We know who it is. Build relationships and stakeholders. We don't need to stand alone as different organizations. We can all work together with a common cause, which is to educate people and get them out to vote and to realize the impact. How many people have said to you, my vote doesn't matter? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Help register voters. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. So I am ready for questions. I've gone 5 minutes over what I expected. I hope I've not been gone too long. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to look in chat first. I know that the Texas Republicans just convened a special session. I saw that on the news tonight. And I do know that Australia finds citizens who don't vote. I know both of those things.
Unfortunately, it's only $20 fine.
They still vote. They
Yeah.
still vote. The $20 still matters to them. It's interesting. So does anyone have any questions?
I'll start off. Dave, are you about to say something? You got on mute.
Yeah. Just right at the beginning, you talked for very briefly, you just mentioned something about immigration. How can somebody who's an immigrant vote against immigrants' rights? My boyfriend is actually an immigrant, and he is very against people just coming into the country and becoming citizens without going through all the work that he had to go through to to become a citizen. And it's an interesting, of course, it was easy for him because he's not Mexican or from Central or South America, where the quotas are such that you can't legitimately become an American. But it is an interesting take on things. Nothing to do with civics really, but
it's a good point. So my husband was a refugee as a little boy. So they escaped Hungary and went to Canada because the United States would not take them in. Only Australia and Canada took Hungarian refugees in '56. And so he was a refugee and he's an immigrant. And of course, I'm an immigrant to this country as well. And so your boyfriend should think about that, because it isn't easy. Not meaning he has to agree with me. That's what I'm saying, Dave, at all. What I'm saying is that what he needs to realize and recognize is that there's different people. So if someone is a refugee, it is really a completely different thought process, or should be, than an immigrant. Do I think that everybody should be let in? Of course I do.
Right.
Do I think then that you have to have clear, concise, correct, understandable, would be lovely, rules that are followed? Of course I do. Would I ever vote against immigrants? Of course I would not, because I am one. I would say, I would vote instead for let's make the immigration much more understandable, who can come in, who can't, and why, so that we all understand what it is. And I'm glad he got in, by the way. Yes, Jude.
Jude.
June, did you say?
Yeah.
Oh, because I see Julie's name up on the screen, and that's why I thought, thank you. First of all, Christine, hi. We finally meet sort of in person, and it was fantastic. And you're just doing one of the most important things that can be done now. We're facing such a crisis. So thank you. Actually, I just want to throw my 2 cents in, because this eats at my soul. When I first heard DeSantis set up and proudly say he was going to ban something that didn't even exist, I was very upset that I didn't see a great deal of reaction in the newspapers, on TV. It took a while. And now that it's spreading across the country, people realize the impact. And so I'll get your thoughts and anyone else's. I believe that the Republicans, they have a twofold reason to do this. Number one, that I think instead of just walking in and saying we're going to rewrite the curriculum according to Ozzie and Harriet, they decided that they would come up with this boogeyman called CRT, which, as you said, isn't even taught. and Michael's just written about this again for our news. It's not even taught across the country. So why would you bring it up and continue to bring it up? Well, again, it's a way to create this boogeyman, straw man, whatever. See what the danger is? Therefore, we're going to solve the problem. We're going to kill this dragon by rewriting our civics / history. And it's brainwashing. That's number one. And number two, of course, it's a way to shape and nourish the kids to leave high school and vote Republican, if indeed this brainwashing curriculum is solid enough and continues enough. I think it's one of the most dangerous things we've ever faced. And the third thing I'm so glad you brought up is our ignorance about civics. Most of us in the club know about this. I've written about it. People across the country don't even know who the vice president is. And yet the people who are immigrants and take the test and pass it and become citizens, we can't answer those same questions. It is extremely dangerous. So just your thoughts on how I'm seeing it, and mostly what else can we do so that when August 10th comes and school begins and those teachers are standing there and Johnny raises his hand and says, hey, another Black person unarmed Black person was killed by a cop, or I want to understand why these voter suppression laws are taking place. I thought we had, a Voters' Rights Act. What is that teacher going to be able to say safely without losing his or her job? Thank you.
Well, that is certainly a few loaded questions.
Yeah. But hi.
And first and foremost, in addition to working with civics education, I'm leading a task force with 10 other organizations within Palm Beach County on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need, and you need, as a Democratic club and a Democratic Party and people who believe in equal rights, to be aware of what's going on in that area and to stand up. Standing up is really important in many ways. I even see today what we all look like. You need people in your organization that reflect the community, as we do in ours. We have a few, but we certainly need more. We need to ensure that we're hearing all points of view. How can we encourage people to get out and vote if we don't know what their issues are? So that's my answer to that. With the teachers, it's very worrisome. It should be, because they are being told what they can and can't do. Sarah was a former teacher. She might have more insight in this than I do, but it's really important that you can talk about history. Sarah, do you want to say something?
Well, teachers have always been told what they can and cannot do based on curriculum. I think in some places there's more freedom than others. Your earlier slide that talked about words matter. I think one of the biggest problems with the whole idea of critical race theory, and I've had this conversation with people significantly younger than I and activists, and I have said, words matter and you're using the wrong words.
Yeah.
Critical race theory is critical thinking about history. Period.
History. Thank you.
And it needs to be taught. All the history of this country needs to be taught. I think that, as usual, and this is my bias, the Democrats have managed to make a big deal out of nothing by pushing the negative side of history so much. We need to learn about the history of slavery in this country, and we need to understand it, but it should not replace the history that's already been written. I think if all sides are presented and critical thinking skills are taught, then people will make their own decisions and they will believe it, because all the history exists to knock down all the statues from the Civil War. You can understand why someone would say, well, that's, getting rid of the fact that these people lived and existed. And that's true. That part of history was part of our history. We may not agree with it, but it's there. So I think we need to get the side of history that's not been taught into the curriculum and get rid of the jargon and the lingo and just develop a critical thinking skills curriculum for kids and apply it across English and history and science, rather than making it this one little attack on white history.
Michael,
I was going to say something similar to what you said about the words, and words matter. I said to a superintendent of schools in New York, I know down here, we have to teach this stuff. He said, yeah, just don't call it that. Call it teaching facts. Okay. Now, the problem is that there's several problems. One is, it's defund the police and abolish ICE revisited, which were not explained well. Okay. Now, the critical race theory, that's something that's been around since the 70s that no one paid any attention to.
Right.
And it was something that was studied by academics, and now it's the latest boogeyman. Okay. And when they hear, race is in it, I agree with you in terms of critical thinking, but that's a problem too, because they don't like critical. You're not supposed to be critical. You're not supposed to question things. I mean, that's something that liberals do. And I think that in broadly, they've done social science studies that find that people who self-identify as conservative are more willing to accept what they're told by, their parents or so you're already dealing with a problem with the word critical, but as we have to deal with this now, I don't think that we can go and jettison that. We don't have to lead with it. As far as knocking down the statutes, I would make a distinction between Jefferson and Washington owning slaves, and Robert E. Lee committing treason in order to preserve slavery. And I'm sure you would too. It's something that needs to be, that people need to hear. But the problem is that, as the woman said, I'm not going to teach my child to be ashamed of his race. Well, that's too bad. I mean, if it's going to make you ashamed of your race, that 100 years ago or 200 years ago, your ancestors did these terrible things, I'm ashamed that they did those things. It doesn't make me ashamed necessarily. It makes me educated, is what it makes me. So
I understand. Dave, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on the statues. Most of those statues were not erected after the Civil War.
that's right.
Most of those statues were erected during the 1960s to celebrate the Civil War heroes in the South. And so they're not a legacy of the Civil War back then. They're a legacy, they are a response to the civil rights struggle.
Exactly.
With civics
should be put in a
education,
museum.
perhaps if more people talk about it, we can get something that is not so one side over the other. That includes with the statutes. It does. Because again, as somebody that comes from another country, I have to tell you that what I see is different than what you see. which is why I'm doing civics education and why I'm going to bring us back. Kathy, I see you nodding your head. Do you have something you want to say? You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself, Kathy. I see you moving your lips, but no sound. Were you able to unmute yourself? It should be down in the bottom corner. You should see a mic there you go.
Okay, there now. I agree with you. And I also like what Dave had to say about those statues being erected long after the Civil War ended. And they were meant for one thing, and that was to shove that racism in people's face. I think the country has to deal with the racism, but I think you also make a great point with the critical race theory. It's been around since the 70s. It's not something that has been taught in schools. It's usually, isn't it reserved for college educated, prosecutorial kind of people?
And your history is your history in reality.
Exactly.
Even if you don't talk about it, doesn't mean it goes away. It just means the next generation isn't aware of it.
That's right.
You can't undo it. You can just try to make it be forgotten, which is not good.
What particularly scares me is the religious aspect that is being injected into the education. A moment of silence, that you have to disclose your
yes,
your feelings. That's not democracy.
No,
good.
we haven't had democracy.
That's a good catch, Kathy. I agree with it. Fred, you're sitting so quietly. Do you have anything that you'd like to add? You're good? Audrey, I know that you're not Audrey, but do you have anything you want to add? You have to unmute. You're good?
I bet Charlie has
Julie, do you
something.
have anything you want to add? Judy, do you have anything you want to add? I want to make sure everybody has a chance to get their voice heard because we have a small group. We can do that. Gail, do you have
I'll make
anything?
one comment, and that is everybody's talking about what happens in the schools, but what about what happens in the homes? What about the parents and children communicating? Do they communicate? Or is it, daycare and babysitters? What is it? I mean, we're in a different mix now than we were, say, 2 years ago, pre-COVID, with daycare centers closing and so forth. What about the communication between the parents and the kids? And what about even just getting parents to have a conversation with the kids? I mean, my father always said, he'd give me a look and say, you know the difference between right and wrong. He didn't have to say anymore. He was right. I mean, as a little kid, that computed, that made total sense.
Civics education with my father, Fred, I come from a large family of 9 children. And when you turned around 13, he would tell you, if you don't vote, you can't do this. If you don't vote, and by the time you were 16, he says, if you don't register to vote now, you can't watch TV. If you don't register, you can't talk about politics. And so what he did is he made 9 very, very strongly political people, because we know that if we don't vote, we can't talk about it, because we were brought up with that from a very early age. So I agree, that's important. Gail, do you want to add anything?
I'm just listening. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Is there anyone?
The problem though, going back to the previous comment with respect to voting and the like, is that we're in a different time than what we've ever experienced, I think, both nationally and locally, in terms of misinformation. So while before you could encourage somebody to vote based on your ideals or what you presented as your ability, or just even what might be going on locally, that's very challenging to do now, because there's a lot of mixed and inaccurate information. So it creates an even different dynamic to entice somebody who otherwise isn't involved to get involved. It's very challenging for an individual to go out and figure out what is factual, what is accurate, and what is not, when they're getting varying degrees of different information. And that's, I think, something that we can all work on locally. But I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges to getting people to vote presently.
Julie, I think that's very astute. June, you're going to be next. I also think that that's one of the reasons for critical thinking in the exercises. You can certainly do it with your group. June.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Fred brought up something very, very, very important, which is parents' knowledge or lack of knowledge about what their kids are studying in school because of the way we live now. I was sort of counting on the kids going home and saying, this is the way slavery has been taught, or this is how my question was answered. And rethinking that now because of what he said. But I urge, you can tell this is so important to me. There's more to it than this too. It's a whole way, as I said, of Ozzie and Harriet, for those of you who are old enough to remember to look at the world. I read every single line of the new curriculum for this year, every single line for K through 12. And at first, it doesn't say anything so specific that allows you, a window into what they're doing. But there's a lot of stuff there. For example, the Pledge of Allegiance. You watch what's going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. The first kid who says, I do not wish to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Athletes who take a knee, for example. Watch what's going to happen. Now, I've heard other people say, don't worry, including one of our elected officials, our teachers are smart, our local school boards are good. Boom. They've got this set up so they will not be ignoring the teacher who says, I want to do the right thing and I am going to teach fact. That bonus, Christine, that you mentioned, that is a bribe to make sure that those who are on the fence are going to do what they say. They're going to be watching. They have said this. Kokorin, that you mentioned before, who, well, never mind his background, but listen to his public speeches, especially the recent one at the Christian University, just what you had mentioned. We're going to make sure those leftists don't infiltrate our school. We have to police the teachers. They mean business. So this is the teachers, and I've been one and I know how hard it is, the work when the school boards are the best of their ability. They are under threat. And I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we can't go to the PTAs, I think we can't, and say, would you please monitor your kids' homework? I don't know what we can do. Try to get the information out, but it is critically important because the kids, especially the younger ones, aren't going to know what hit them. But if anybody has the time, and it's boring, take a look at the curriculum line by line, and you'll see these things again about Christopher Columbus, that some people wanted out, some wanted in, standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. It is frightening. And they are grooming a bunch of Republican voters. That's, as I said earlier, part of it. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself now. But as I said, what you're talking about is it's critical.
Well, I think, yes, Sarah.
I just want to say that if we look at what's going on now and the things you were saying about the moment of silence, standing for the pledge, Christopher Columbus, all of that, my education in the 50s and 60s included Christopher Columbus. I continued to teach Christopher Columbus to elementary school children. We told them that there was more, but that was the line. I had a moment of silence in my elementary school and my middle school and my high school. And in high school for 2 years, I refused to say the pledge to the flag, but I stood. And the only consequence was a logically good one. I learned how to think and question. And I think we have to be careful that we don't react the way the very conservative other side is reacting and make this more divisive than less. And kids learn most of their stuff at home, no matter how influential the school and the teacher is. It's the attitude of the parents and the family that comes through a significant portion of the time. So I'm sure there's so much in that bill that we wouldn't want to be there. but education's real good at throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So probably in 5 years, they'll rewrite it. It's either gonna get better or worse. But I guess I'm saying we have to have a little faith
It
in,
probably depends on who becomes governor in Florida.
Exactly.
yeah.
Well said, Kathy, and thank you, Sarah. So I guess that's, Michael, I see you have your hand up, and I guess we've
Yeah.
done our hour, right? So that I don't
Yeah.
want to keep people.
Yeah, we can, if, I just wanted to read what I read to you before, Christine, and then maybe get Sarah's thoughts on it, and tell me what I'm missing. But the directive that they just signed, that they bragged is going to prevent critical race theory from being taught. The pertinent paragraph says, instruction on the required topics must be factual and objective and may not suppress or distort significant historical events, such as the Holocaust, and may not define American history as something other than the creation of a new nation based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. So I'm trying to understand how you can even teach slavery without running afoul of this.
Exactly.
I don't think you can, or you have to be very careful. Based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. Well, there's nothing in the Declaration of Independence that would support slavery. If they were smart, they might have said, reference the Constitution and the fact that the African-American slaves only counted as 3/5 of a person. But they talked about the Declaration of Independence with its soaring language about all men created equal, and you have slavery. So how do you teach it? You can't. The other thing that is not a mistake in this, it's a very deliberate attempt to divide our Jewish and Black voters in the Democratic Party. Reference the Holocaust, which is, certainly should be, but they should have said historical events such as the Holocaust and slavery. The only place slavery can come in is in American history, and there they say that you can't bring it in. So.
It can come in one other place, and that's with the English classes and Black literature. And if anybody knows it, I know I set up the very first program in Newtown, Connecticut, in Black literature. All of our early Black authors, especially from the 50s on, their entire theme is what happened to them because of slavery or living in a world with slavery.
Right.
So this spreads all over the entire curriculum, perhaps with the exception of mathematics, but you watch, mark my word, we're going to get into creationism soon. In fact, it's already been mentioned. It'll be over the whole curriculum. I strongly disagree with anyone who says, don't worry about it. We've been through it before, we'll get over it. This is now. What will happen 10 years from now is not going to undo what's happening right now. And again, especially when they groom their next crop of voters who are not voting for a Bush or a Reagan, God help us with that, but for people who are fascists. So big difference in where we are today. Thank you.
Michael.
To get back to civics, if I can, I think that it's really important that the education gets talked about, June. I do. But I also want, because what we're saying is almost like there is no hope from what you say.
No, there is, if we do something.
Right.
That's what I'm going to say, is that I see you, Judy, just give me 1 second.
Okay.
As that what we're talking about with civics education and why I suspect Michael asked me to present is so that we could talk about what we can do.
Right.
And what can you do? You can get out the vote. and make certain you have educated voters. That's what the whole thing is, I think. Judy.
Right. Oh, I was just actually, this is Julie. I'm sorry. I don't know if you said Judy
No,
or
it's-
Julie. I apologize.
It's Judy and she has her hand up. Julie, I'll let you
Okay.
go next.
Yes, yes. I just wanted to say that when I was watching the George Floyd demonstrations, I was really overwhelmed with pride that there were so many white people. And I was just feeling that they must be getting this in school. I don't know if they're getting this activism at home. And I was just thinking that teachers can really imbue the reality in the students, and I think that and unfortunately people became aware of it. I think that may be how the whole thing festered, because yeah,
Teachers
because
do make a difference. I agree with you, Judy. Julie.
as the parents, maybe some children started to dislike their parents.
A question.
Julie, what would you like next? And Charlie, you're after Julie.
Just very briefly, I was just going to ask Michael if he could forward out the document that he was reading from, if he wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Forward it.
Pardon me?
sorry?
Yeah, would you mind emailing that to me, Michael?
Yeah, it's actually in my article in the newsletter, which you should have.
Oh, perfect.
And-
Okay,
and,
thank you.
There's a
No.
link. You can click right on it and go to the document.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Charlie.
I didn't really have my hand up, but I'll give you a comment. I just think we teach American history with a very gilded interpretation that doesn't really line up with reality. You know, our founders and our historical figures had their warts and all, and we need to teach the whole, a holistic version of American history instead of the gilded version.
Dave.
That's actually a great name for courses, warts and all. But I think it's funny that they pick that you have to teach about the Declaration of Independence, because that has no legal strength at all. It means nothing. Otherwise, we would have the right to a pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
The Constitution is the only thing that means anything legally.
Well, it's the values.
They completely ignored the Declaration of Independence when they went into the Constitution.
No, well, no, what they said was the values expressed in it, and it is. But what Charlie just said, I wrote an article last year on July 4th about the founders, and they were a pretty damn impressive group of people. I mean, what they were trying to do, warts and all, yes. But I said, when the Declaration said something like, with a decent respect for the opinions of others, and I wrote, can you imagine Mitch McConnell or Donald Trump having a decent respect for anything? I mean, these people were, trying to create a new government, and they didn't do a bad job of it. They knew that it had to be, it had to, it was not static. It needed to grow with the times, and it has, but now it's going backwards, or, there are people that would like to take it backwards.
And know that these issues are not just in America, that they're talking in countries around the world. If you look at Hungary, you look at England, you look at a lot of countries now, we have to fight for our democracy. And I think that's a perfect way to end this presentation, to say, let's do that together. If you need any connections on how to get to register the people to vote, if you need tools on the education, we have them. If you want to join our organization in any way to work on any of these school programs. Again, we are a community and all of us need to work together to get out to vote. Dave, I see you have your hand up.
One more. I mean, one of the things that does make America amazing is that we really are, first of all, we're a new country. In world history, we're one of the, newer countries. And we're also really are the biggest melting pot of any country. And so we face issues that other countries really don't, that have a more homogeneous population and have, since the tribe founded the country, 1,000 years ago. So, we do face, just interesting things of millions of people moving into the United States and building the country, a lot of growing pains. And this is probably not what some of the founding, fathers thought. That there weren't a whole lot of founding mothers, I noticed either. But it's, it is an amazing country. And,
Oh, that's another good way to end. Christine, thank you so much. It was great.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yay.
And good night, everyone.
Thank you
Our next meeting will
all.
be
This was great.
August
Good night.
8th. I hope to have Omari Hardy speaking, the representative from District 88.
And we hope to do it live.
Yeah, that's right. It'll be live back to Pompey Park. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Michael.
Good night, Audrey, Marty,
Good night, Michael. Thanks.
June,
Good
Shar.
night, Gracie. Hey, good night, Gracie.
Right.
I thought I'd put that in.
2, 1, 0.
It was good.